There's really only one sensible way to deal with a Kawasaki Z1 RTC. Chain it to the garage floor, feed it occasionally. Because in 1978, this thing didn't just win the horsepower war, it made grown journalists nervous to twist the throttle. The 1970s were a golden age for motorcycles. Honda's inline fours sounded like the future. Ducati, Moto Guzzi, and BMW's big twins brought European flair. Everyone was experimenting, some brilliantly, some not so much. But through most of the decade, one bike sat on top of the food chain, the Kawasaki Z1. Built for one thing, raw speed, it was feared at every stoplight in America. A 0 to 60 time in the high 4-second range, a full second quicker than exotic cars costing many times more. By the late 70s, though, the rest of the industry had caught up. The Z1, now badged the KZ1000, had won on pure displacement. It was simply bigger than anything else on the road when it launched. But in 1978, Honda, Suzuki, and Yamaha all fired back with their own 1,000 cubic centimeters plus superbikes. The 6-cylinder Honda CBX, the Suzuki GS1000, and the Yamaha XS 1100. On paper, every one of them was quicker than Kawasaki's aging flagship. Kawasaki needed an answer. Meanwhile, Europe was quietly winning a different war, the sport touring war. BMW and Moto Guzzi were building big, comfortable, stylish machines with a kind of polished Japanese manufacturers hadn't quite figured out. It birthed a phrase that stuck: the UJM, Universal Japanese Motorcycle, reliable, fast. Also kind of boring. So for 1978, Kawasaki gave the Z1 a facelift and renamed it the Z1R. A squared-off tank, upswept exhaust, a small fairing with a smoked windscreen, aiming squarely at that European sport touring crowd. It didn't really land the way Kawasaki hoped, but behind the scenes, engineers were cooking up something far more dangerous. A version of the Z1R that would drag Japanese motorcycling into territory nobody had dared touch: factory turbocharging. Turbochargers and superchargers both do the same basic job: cram extra air into the combustion chamber. Superchargers are driven mechanically off the engine. Turbochargers spin a compressor using exhaust gas that would otherwise be wasted. Turbo tech had matured in aircraft and locomotives through the first half of the 20th century, and by the late 70s it had found its way into serious performance cars. The Porsche 911 Turbo, the Buick Regal/Grand National Turbo cars. But motorcycles, nobody in the factory world would touch it. The only turbo bikes on the road were garage builds, drag racers bolting turbo kits from companies like American Turbo Pack, ATP, onto Honda CBs, and Kawasaki Z1s. Building a factory-backed turbo superbike was an entirely different level of risk. Kawasaki's own engineers were nervous. Emissions rules, liability, warranty exposure. It took an outsider to push it through. Alan Masek, a former Kawasaki USA marketing executive and general manager who'd helped build the brand's American dealer network through the 70s. After leaving Kawasaki, Masek started his own company, the Turbo Cycle Corporation, or TCC, with one goal: bring turbocharging to the street, using his industry connections to make it happen. Working with John Gleason of American Turbo Pack, Masek struck a deal with Kawasaki. TCC would take stock Z1Rs, send them to a small California workshop, fit them with a Rajay turbocharger package, and ship the finished bikes back to Kawasaki dealerships. Sold not quite as an official factory Kawasaki, but as a TCC product you could buy off a Kawasaki showroom floor. The mechanical recipe: out went the 4 carbs and the factory 4-into-2 exhaust. In came a single large Bendix carburetor with an accelerator pump, a custom exhaust collector nicknamed the Log, and a draw-through turbo setup, meaning the carburetor sits before the turbo, so it never actually sees boost pressure. It's the simplest way to turbocharge an engine. The whole motor just behaves like a much larger, naturally aspirated engine, breathing in more air and fuel together. It's basically how every aftermarket turbo kit of the era worked, and Kawasaki followed the same playbook. The result was called the Z1 RTC. So, was it worth it? Short answer, absolutely. The standard Z1R made around 90-something horsepower and ran a quarter mile in the high 11s. The Z1 RTC, with the turbo cranked up, could produce somewhere around 130 horsepower. Depending on the exact boost setting, sources put the range anywhere from roughly 105 to as high as 145 brake horsepower on max boost. Quarter-mile times dropped into the 10-second bracket at over 130 miles per hour, numbers that were simply unthinkable for a showroom bike in 1978. One period road test didn't hold back. The reviewer's advice, paraphrased, was basically, don't ride this thing, chain it up in the garage like a dangerous animal, and feed it occasionally. But it came with a catch, and a big one. Turbo lag. Below around 4,500 revolutions per minute, the Z1 RTC rode almost exactly like a stock KZ1000. Docile, quiet, decent fuel economy. Then past that threshold, the power arrived almost instantly, like flipping a switch with a beat of hesitation built into it. Cycle Magazine's own contemporary review put it best. There really wasn't much middle ground. It was either a sleepy commuter or a full-blown animal, with almost nothing in between. Even so, the performance was undeniable. Car and Driver famously ran a Z1 RTC against a Porsche 911 Turbo in 1979 and concluded that on any decent straight, the Kawasaki simply rode away from the Porsche and didn't look back. So this should have flown off dealer floors, right? 130 horsepower, otherworldly speed. Americans love that. It didn't happen. Across its roughly 2-year production run, only around 500 units were sold. Other counts put total production closer to 519, a tiny number for a machine this significant. Why? For one, the math didn't favor TCC. A savvy rider could buy a standard KZ1000 and bolt on the same ATP turbo kit themselves for a few $1,000s, landing in almost the same place, minus the official badge. And honestly, with the same voided warranty risk either way, because the factory Z1 RTC didn't come with a warranty at all. Instead, it came with a liability waiver. Buyers had to sign off acknowledging that riding on full boost for too long could melt the engine. And that wasn't an exaggeration. The very first 1978 models had a fully adjustable wastegate. Owners could crank up boost pressure with a simple screwdriver. Predictably, a lot of engines didn't survive that temptation, which is part of why early first-year bikes are so rare today. The second-year Molly edition, named for its black, yellow, orange, and red paint scheme, switched to a fixed wastegate, and more of those survive intact. But there's a more fundamental issue here, and it's not really about reliability, it's about physics. The late 70s were a transitional era for motorcycle chassis design. Bikes like the Kawasaki H2 and the Honda CBX had already proven that traditional steel tube frames, the kind that had been standard for decades, couldn't really handle the power these new engines were putting out. Even the CBX, only making around 100 horsepower, was held back by chassis tech that hadn't caught up yet. Now picture a bike making 30% more power than anything else on the road, wrapped in the exact same early 70s style frame. The Z1 RTC was, in a very real sense, too fast for its own chassis. It's a big part of why sport bike design changed so dramatically through the early to mid-1980s. Stiffer frames, better suspension, and eventually the aluminum frame superbikes we'd recognize today. So the Z1 RTC never became a sales success, and it was never really meant to be a daily rider. What it became instead is a footnote that turned out to matter a lot more than its sales numbers suggest. Just a few years later, every Japanese manufacturer scrambled to build their own turbo bike. Kawasaki itself came back with what might be the wildest of them all, the 750 Turbo, reportedly capable of around 150 miles per hour. Insurance companies eventually blacklisted turbocharged motorcycles altogether, and by the mid-80s, most riders realized a simple truth. A bigger, naturally aspirated leader bike was usually just a better bet than a complicated, laggy turbo middleweight. The turbo era faded almost as fast as it arrived, but zoom out further, And the Z1 RTC is really the opening shot in motorcycling's entire horsepower war. Honda had been proud just to hit 100 horsepower with the CBX in 1978, the first production bike to do it. Months later, here comes Kawasaki, slapping a turbo on an aging platform and claiming 130. That's honestly the most Kawasaki thing that could possibly happen. And in a strange way, it's the true ancestor of bikes like the Hayabusa and the supercharged Kawasaki H2. Proof that a production bike could simply leave everyone else in the dust. The Z1 RTC never got its warranty, its reliability, or really its sales numbers sorted out. But it proved the concept, and that was enough to change motorcycling forever. If you want more deep dives into the machines that were too fast, too weird, or too far ahead of their time, hit subscribe, comment, and turn on notifications. Ride safe, and I'll see you in the next one.